Alright everyone, hope you guys are all doing well and crushing at your games. And I just wanted to put out a quick video going over a hand I played when I recently took a shot at 1020. Spoiler, overall for the 1020 shot, it did not go well. I'm back down at the lower stakes, going to be grinding it back up, but I'm happy to take very aggressive shots while I'm not playing full time to try to get a little bit better and try to hopefully eventually become a reg in some of these bigger games. My lesson from 1020 is it's probably not going to happen for a while, but you know, getting some experience at 1020 and getting a feel for what that swing kind of feels like, that's going to make me just the more confident when I play at 510 and when I play at 2-4 and 3-6 and 1-2. So I did get some good experience from it, a good learning lesson. Studying some of the hands away from the table is also going to help me a bunch for all those other stakes and for back when I get into 1020 again. And there was a big lesson actually from this session that I took away, and it's the main reason, even more than this hand, that I kind of wanted to share my experience with you guys. And that was kind of a form of tilt that I think overcame me when I was playing in these games. And what happened to me was, for some reason when I sat down, I just made the assumption, because it was the first time I was playing a 1020 game on ACR Poker, that everyone at the table was just going to see me as maybe scared money and adjust accordingly by probably bluffing me a little bit more than they should, and also folding a little bit more than they should to my aggression. And kind of saying that loud, hopefully you guys are recognizing that that's not something that a good player would ever do these days right off the bat. What they're going to do, and what you should do, is just play your baseline GTO strategy, or as close as you know how to, and after you get solid evidence that you need to adjust one way or the other, then you adjust one way or the other. So that's much more likely what all the players were doing, and it's also what I should have been doing, is just kind of playing as close to GTO as I know how, hoping that I'm closer than some of the other guys at the table so I can make a little money, and then adjusting accordingly as I have evidence. And so I don't know really why I got stuck in this thought process, but it really overcame a lot of my decisions that I made at this 1020 game, and we'll kind of see it in this hand with my aggression in the hand being more aggressive than I should be. And the big takeaway was, typically when I am making a bad thought process, I'll give myself credit that I'm pretty good about recognizing that I'm kind of in a bad thought process, and I'll just quit my session and come back later when I'm feeling fresh. Even if, you know, maybe if I just need to take a 5-10 minute break, that's what I'll do. But for this case, at the time, to me, it just seemed perfectly reasonable, logical, and good actually to think that way. And so the takeaway is that anytime you're making an assumption and you don't have solid evidence for that assumption, then you are stuck in a bad thought process, and you should kind of rethink what you're doing or just take a break from the game. And so hopefully this experience is going to reinforce that with me, and if I ever catch myself making assumptions without proof, I'm going to act accordingly. And hopefully hearing this story and seeing this hand might help some of you guys, you know, in your sessions in the future. So that was kind of my big takeaway that I wanted to share with you guys. On to the hand, we'll just talk about it briefly. So what you guys will want to do is you want to keep in mind that in the back of my head, I was just thinking, I want to be aggressive. I want to be aggressive. You know, that bad assumption was kind of stuck in the back of my head. And so in general, we're playing heads up here, so I'm going to be opening a pretty wide range. I don't really have heads up ranges mastered. It's been a long time since I've played heads up, but I'm sure 4 or 5 offsuits in a heads up range. We get a very dry flop, super wide ranges. I'm really happy to bet a quarter pot here and expect him to call with plenty of weaker hands like king high backdoor flush draws, ace high backdoor flush draws, gut shots, things like that. And also fold hands that we need protection against. So I think the flop's just fine, nothing to worry about. When we get to the turn, overall, our range is going to want to overbet when we are betting. I think that's going to be by far our biggest sizing that we choose. However, I don't think this hand, thinking about it logically now, I don't really think this hand fits into that kind of a sizing. I don't think we're so weak that we need to turn it into a bluff just yet. I don't think we have the right combo. We're going to want the 5 of hearts, or even the 4 or 5 of hearts. It would be even better if we're going to be turning it into a bluff. This one, I think we're just trying to get to showdown. And maybe if it goes check on some rivers, do something. But for the most part, we're probably going to want to be checking here. But in my aggressive mode, I just went, basically, my thinking was as simple as the king is a really good turn for us. And this hand doesn't have a ton of showdown value. He's got a lot of weak 1-pair hands that are capped. Put all that together, and I just decided to turn my hand into a bluff and go with what kind of the strong parts of my range want to do. So I went with the overbet. and we get the 6 on the river. I don't really think it changes all that much because I bet so large on the turn. 7-5 isn't really a thing, except for exactly 7-5 of hearts, so I'm not really going to worry about that. This could make him 2-pair with queen 6 and like king 6 of hearts or clubs, but again, very few combos. So realistically, this turn is probably slightly better for me than for him because I'm more likely to have 7-5. But for the most part, it's just kind of a blink. Doesn't really matter at all. And so in my aggressive mode, again, and especially because I overbet the turn, now he's really capped towards like a lot of queen X hands, king X hands, 1-pair hands, and the occasional pocket 4s slow play, or like a queen 4 slow play, or a king 4. And so for me, that was one thing that I did think about, that the 4 is actually kind of a good blocker. I think guys are going to be a lot more likely to check raise queen 8 than they are queen 4. So that's pretty reduced, and 8s are pretty reduced because they 3-bet quite a bit heads up and do check raise a decent amount on the flop. Yeah, so I thought the 4 was good for reducing the 2-pair part of his range, which is going to be like the biggest chunk of his calling range. And again, I'm stuck in aggressive mode, right? So we put it all in here. For me, for value, probably going to be doing this with obviously pocket 4s, pocket queens, pocket 8s, and king 8, king queen, king 4, and pocket aces. I think are probably kind of the good range for the overbet jam here. And just to show you guys kind of the results, not that it really matters too much, or I guess we can kind of analyze it a little bit. He did tank for quite a bit, and he found the call with the king 5, which is exactly, one of the type of hands that I was trying to get him to fold. So we can, right away see that he's not playing tighter versus my barreling range. In GTO land, this is probably break even or close to break even. Yeah, obviously, if I'm jamming things like 4-5, then it's going to be printing money because I'm just going to be massively over bluffing. But he doesn't know that. Yeah, moral of the story is he called with a hand that I thought might fold some of the time, given my line and given my silly assumption that I had at the time. But overall, you can see that there still were some reasonable thought process put into it behind that, right? I recognize that we can get away with a quarter pot bet with range on the flop pretty easily. I recognize that the king's really good for our range. We're going to want to be overbetting a decent amount on the river, kind of a blank card, and still going to want to have a decent overbetting range for value. Thought about how the 4 was a good 2-pair blocker hand for probably the strongest parts of his range. And those were all kind of my thought process going through. Had I not been, I guess, stuck in aggressive mode, I'm not sure actually if I would have played this hand correct even. I might have actually been over aggressive with the 5-4 even without having that kind of mental block, but I think I would have gotten a little bit closer. So we can see here, the quarter pot bet with almost our entire range is just fine, but you can see right away 5-4 is already starting to check. And I do want to point out that I used my 6 max ranges instead of a heads up range, so we don't have the 5-4 off or a lot of the wider hands that we would have. But basically what this means is if the check is bad with these 5-4s of spades and clubs, when we get to turns and rivers, it's going to be even more bad in a heads up match where we have plenty of other hands to choose from that are weak in our range for bluffs. We're actually going to have more showdown versus his range because he's going to be getting to the turn with just more offsuit combos of like gut shots and things like that. And real quick, I did just want to point out, I kind of solved this just to kind of contrast. And if you did want to play a mixed strategy, you certainly can. But one big thing to point out is you're checking a lot more when you're playing that mixed strategy, obviously because you're having to take your strongest hands are going to be put into overbets or bigger bets at a higher frequency, so you can't just get away with betting small with a bunch of medium and weak stuff all the time, or you're just going to get check raised like crazy. And you can see if we do end up playing a mixed strategy, we got to find a check a lot with 5-4 and 5s and 6s and 7s, kind of these low pairs, and 3s and 2s. So this isn't a strategy that I would probably be trying to implement in this case, but I just wanted to point that out, that if I was playing a mixed sizing strategy, then this gets even worse. Something for you guys to keep in mind. And that's as much analysis as I'll do using the mixed strategy. Let's go to the quarter pot with range, and he calls. We get the king of hearts. Right away, you can see that we certainly do want to be overbetting. This is only a 1.5x overbet, and I went closer to 2x, but overbet is definitely good with a lot of things in our range. Unfortunately, what you can see here is that we need the hearts, just like kind of I was saying in the analysis. We need that extra equity. When we don't have that, then we are wanting to check. And it's going to be the same with the 5-4. If we have the heart, we do get to continue to barrel at some frequency, not as aggressively as the 5-4 of hearts itself, but you can kind of see that shown here, looking at the 3s when we have the heart, the 2s when we have the heart. So kind of let that be your guide on those turns that bring a flush draw, for your barreling range. And the reason that we don't need to be betting the 5-4 is because of all the other stuff that we have to bluff. So you can see here that this is another big miss. Actually, even in aggressive mode, I might have missed out on this right here. Look at all these ace-X that are bluffing on this turn. Using all these ace-2s without the hearts, ace-3s. Still a pretty heavy frequency with ace-5s. Ace-Jack that turned a gut shot. Ace-10 that turned a gut shot that only has one heart. Same with ace-Jack. And you can see these, even with the 3 hearts. Having one heart is really important here. And, all these natural, gut shots or open-enders that can make really strong straights. And then things that can block really strong straights on various rivers. So we just don't need the 5-4 as a bluff because we have all this extra stuff. And then this goes into play on the river when we get to the river and we still have a pair on that 6 that's just kind of such a blank. We're going to have all of this stuff to draw from, which is another reason why we're probably going to see that the 5-4 just doesn't need to be bluffed on the river even after the overbet. And I just wanted to quickly show his calling range. So he is calling with some Jack-10s. And he is calling with, all these ace-high flush draws. Well, the ace-4 beats us. So on the 6, we are actually going to have some showdown value. And it looks like he's just jamming with the 7-5 or raising. So he's actually not supposed to get there with the 7-5 at all. But this is another thing that we actually are going to have some showdown value versus some of those combos. Not a ton, but certainly enough that when we have all these other bluffs that we can be using, we're just over bluffing massively if we're bluffing all the 5-4. So we call. We get the 6 of diamonds. And he's going to check to us. And boom, right away you can see that, we're just, it's kind of thinking about wanting to start bluffing some of these 5-4s, but for the most part, we just need to be giving up. That is a pretty big bummer. And looks like we're doing, so yeah, king, queen, kings, queens, 8s, 4s. I guess the 4s don't want to jam because he's going to be check raising with like 2 pairs enough that we get, and bluffs, so we get the value from those bluffs. And again, let's pull up this range explorer and let's take a look at what our bluffs are supposed to be here. And you can see here we're not using any pairs. So we're finding bluffs with these ace-2s, the ace-3s, ace-5, finding bluffs with these combos that don't have the heart. And so that's kind of the moral of the story. I just got over aggressive in a spot where, and again, it's going to be heads up, right? If I'm opening 5-4, I have just all this other stuff, all these kind of middling, nothing stuff that I can find bluffs with. I just don't need to be turning the 5-4 into the bluff. So I just let kind of a bad assumption just kind of take over my whole thought process, and definitely a mistake that I won't be making in the future, or at least not for a long, long time while I kind of remember this painful lesson here. Let's go on. So we do jam, and we can see here that king 5 is kind of basically the threshold. So that was the hand, and hopefully there was a good takeaway in there somewhere for you guys. Appreciate you watching, and if you have any comments, questions, feedback, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. Good luck at the tables, everyone, and take it easy.